So there was this album that was released almost 20 years ago. Oh my god, I'm so old. This cannot be real. Ah! It was called The Rising Tide, with tide being like as in tied together. And I've always loved the play on words and what that meant in both like a literal and more abstract sense. And so why not try to turn that into a video game, right? Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is Dev Diary, a series where I try to make my own video games. So if game dev videos are your thing, consider subscribing to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. Jumping right into things, the player controls an Ultraman-like character. They must traverse the voided sea with WASD, with the ability to fire a projectile from their chest cannon with left click. Pressing tab will toggle between the real world and the grid, which is a simplified version of the real world that also provides the player with directions to nearby beacons. And beacons are the key to the gameplay loop. The amounts spawned are random and will appear at random places within the voided sea, and when near enough to one of these beacons, the player will begin to charge it up automatically. Once fully charged, it activates, placing it on the player's power grid. And activated beacons will do multiple things. First, an activated beacon will begin to spawn ships, which will aid the player in battle. Second, activated beacons will connect to the player's main beacon, which is always colored white. And as the player activates more beacons, they will start to unlock special perks for their character. When 25% of the beacons are activated, this will begin to assign random ships to the player, eventually giving them their own personal fleet to fight alongside. At 50% of all beacons activated, the player is given a passive ability to fire a burst of projectiles in 8 directions. This ability activates automatically every couple of seconds. And finally, at 75%, the player's main beacon gains the ability to heal all nearby ships and the player, which is actually the only method of healing in this game. Now, the player's beacon also has its own laser defense mechanism, which was meant to produce as many individual beams as active beacons, but somewhere along the line that broke and I did not realize until now. And while on the subject of expected features, there were meant to be a lot more perks. Like, the original idea was to have a bunch of different specific beacons that could spawn, all of which would provide their own unique perks. And this would have forced the player to adapt to whatever the game gave them. But due to time constraints, beacons are used in a more general manner. And a perk I really wanted to add was one that would remind you that if you enjoy my content, supporting me on Patreon can help me keep making it. And doing so can get you access to exclusive content and downloads, and even early access to the weekly Dev Diary videos before they're released on YouTube. Now, there is technically a day-night cycle in our game, and they're broken up into a few key segments. In the first few segments, a number of enemies are spawned near a random beacon, but in the final segment, the player's main beacon will be targeted with an even larger number of enemies. How many and what type of enemies spawned depends on how many days have passed, the time of which can be kept track of at the top left of the screen, along with info for the player's health and all the current active beacons. It's here and also on the grid that the player can keep track of any beacons that are under attack by looking out for any flashing colors. Now, the enemies will only attack active beacons, and if they cannot find a nearby beacon, they will target the player's main beacon. Now, our enemy types aren't anything too crazy. We have our basic kaiju affair here, a megalodon that likes to get all up close and personal with the beacons. We also have the lava enemy from Super Mario World. It too likes to get all up and close and personal with the beacons, but it's also a lot tougher than the megalodon. Next, we have not Godzilla. They prefer to attack from afar and thus will fire projectiles when near enough to their target beacon. And finally, we have exploding tentacles. They will make a beeline for their target beacon of choice, and when near enough, detonate, causing a great deal of damage to the beacon, ships, and the player. And it's not just explosions that hurt, by the way. Anytime an active beacon takes any damage, it will cause a power surge that'll damage any nearby ships and the player if they're close enough. And so to survive the continuously growing onslaught of dangers, the player will have to continuously defend and keep beacons active. In turn, the beacons will provide the player with buffs and perks to strengthen their own beacon, leading to a whole bunch of chaos should the player make it that far. Again, a lot more variety was planned, but you know, only so many hours in a day. Still, I thought that this was a pretty solid base, and I think with even more content and features, it could actually become something. So what do you think? What should we add next? As always, I'd love to hear from you, so be sure to leave your thoughts and ideas in the comments. And if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to leave a like. But with that said, brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.